Okay, so it's 3 o'clock. We do still have a number of people joining us, so we'll sort of keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as they come through. But we've got a busy event for you today, so we will crack on. So I'm very pleased on behalf of the Essex and Ipswich branch and myself and Brian, my co-chair, to welcome everybody here today. We are expecting over 410 attendees. Whether everyone will attend live remains to be seen. So thank you everyone for taking the time to join us at this virtual event. We were due to be at the Essex University campus, and we're very pleased to be joined by a number of the representatives from Essex, and thank you to Danielle as well, who's going to take over from me shortly. This event has been a movable feast, and we've been planning it, as Danielle was just saying, before we allowed you all in, under John and then Amanda's reigns for over a year, and it was due to take place in May, then September, and now here we are. None of us need any explanation as to why that is the case. So today's event, as I've said, was the brainchild of our former chair, John Topless, who I'm very pleased to say is here today and is going to be speaking a little bit later on. So thank you to John for joining us, and also we've got, as I mentioned, Brian, my co-chair, current co-chair, and also Amanda, who is speaking with John a little bit later. Just a couple of things in terms of thank yous, as we do have so many of you here today. I do just want to say a big thank you to John for his contribution to the branch over the many years, and also to Suzanne and Jennifer, who also resigned their positions on the branch committees this year to move on. Also a very special thank you as well to Terry Wales, who many of you will recognise, but there'll be a little bit more on that later. A few housekeeping rules before I pass on. If I can just ask you all to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you are muted. It might also be helpful if you could turn off your video as well. The chat is going to be muted just for the time being. We will open that up for questions, and we'll be having questions for these speakers as I check my timetable at around about 4 o'clock. So please do stand on your guard for that and be prepared to type your questions in. I think that's all I wanted to say. So I'm going to pass you across to Dr Danielle Tucker, who's Senior Lecturer in Management at the University of Essex, and she's going to take the reins. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Julie, and thank you very much to John and to the Essex and Ipswich branch of the CIPD, who I've been working with on this event. As Julie said, it's been about a year in the making. We've changed dates numerous times in preparation for this, so it's my pleasure to chair the first part of the session today. So as Julie said, my name is Danielle Tucker. I'm a senior lecturer in management, and I'm the programme director for our Masters in Human Resource Management here at Essex Business School. So I would like to welcome you to the University of Essex. We were hoping to welcome you in person to the University of Essex, but instead I'm welcoming you to the University of Essex via this webinar. So Essex Business School is the home to our master's programme in human resource management, and on this programme we aim to combine insights from the best available research with practical skills to provide our students with the skills and knowledge that they need to go on and work in a range of different roles in organisations across the world. Our teaching team comprise of world-leading academics who are active and widely known researchers within their field, and you'll be hearing from two of those in the first part of the session today. This is a great opportunity for us to partner with the local branch of the CIPD to forge connections with them and to share our research with members of the local community. So I'd like to thank them very much for joining with us on this event. And I hope that those of you who are joining from the CIPD side really enjoy the next couple of presentations. So today is really an opportunity to bring together academics and students and practitioners so that we can have a joint conversation about how the well-being of professionals is impacting all of us. So in the first part of the session, we'll hear from two Essex Business School academics about their most recent research in this relevant area. Dr. Ian Roper will talk about agile working and the HR professional, and Dr. Maria Hudson will discuss the potential for employer critical action learning to support the well-being of HR managers. So as Julie said, we'll have both presentations back to back, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions to both our speakers. So hold those questions with you in your mind, and we'll open the chat just as we come to the end of Maria's talk, and then I'll select some of the questions from the chat and put those to our speakers at the end of this part of the session. So first up, we have Dr. Ian Roper. Ian is a reader in Human Resource Management at Essex Business School. He's an academic member of the CIPD and is the Joint Editor-in-Chief for the Journal of Work, Employment and Society. His research focuses on a number of interrelated areas, including reforming work in public services, the impact of employment regulation on equality-related issues, and the professional nature of HRM. Most recently, he's interested in agile working. And today, Ian will talk about the notion of agile working, what it is and what its origins are. He will explore the extent to which COVID-19 might be boosting certain elements of the agile agenda for HR professionals, and examine the benefits and dangers that this may bring if it becomes the new normal. So I'm going to hand over to Ian now for his talk. Thank you, Ian.
So yes, my sort of current and most recent area of interest has been on agile working, and this has, as I'm sure all of you will probably quickly realise, if you've come across this before, that this is, and the whole issue of COVID-19 has made this much more of an acute issue. So when I had plans earlier on to kind of front this up by talking about agile and then link it to COVID, but actually I think it's more sensible to do it the other way around. Let's look at COVID-19 and let's look at what's out there in the public domain now. It's increasingly be talked about as the new normal, and then link that back to the agile model. And I'll talk through about what the agile model is or might be, because there are some issues in that anyway, but even defining it. And I'm going to finish off with an issue about HR's role. We had a little bit of discussion before the meeting fully started, etc., about HR's potential situation, and how all of you who are in HR are certainly going to be feeling the heat about all of these changes and the acute situation that this COVID-19 brings, and the HR people are going to be completely in the front line on a lot of this. So, COVID-19 and the new normal. What have we got? What is the new normal? What is it being suggested? I think one thing that it's clear that you don't have to be somebody who reads an awful lot on HR to have picked up on this one. This is a big, the most prominent, high-profile issue of the working practices, etc. That's been the consequence of COVID-19. And actually, what we should say, really should say on that is those of you who are the luckier ones who had the opportunity to be able to do home working. But behind this is, and that's just a snapshot here, is what's also going on with this is home working as a sort of issue, headline issue, isn't being talked about as something that is just a response to COVID-19. You'll sort of pick up on random headlines I'm picking up here that home working is being promoted now as something that will be the new normal. When we come out of COVID-19, it's being commented widely that home working will never go back to the previous ways of working, that home working will be increasingly a normalized form of work. So I'm going to look at homeworking as a specific aspect of that. But as I sort of hinted at the beginning, I want to put the homeworking as well within this wider context of a model called Agile. Before we do that, what are the other aspects? And again, I'm really not telling you anything that you won't all be aware of. What else has been happening with COVID-19? Well, if homeworking has been a headline issue, one of the kind of headline issues that is very, very visible for all of us to see. The other one has been furlough, a word that frankly I'd never heard of a year ago. Furloughing, and then the more negative impacts that this has been having. That the homeworking, we can talk about the potential complexities and HR issues involved in homework if it does become increasingly the new normal. But less unambiguously bad have been the negative effects on structural issues on the economy and on employment across the board. And again, I'm not going to read individually all of these statistics out. They're not particularly going to be seen as surprising, that the impacts, the disproportionate impact on food services, on aspects of retail, particularly small retail. Some of the issues here about the particular waves and how they had a disproportionate effects and impacts on activities, regardless of the furloughing scheme. And at the bottom point there, this is from the ONS as recently as last week. Of businesses not permanently stopped trading, 17% intend to increase homeworking as a permanent business model in the future. That is important and significant, as we'll come to talk about soon. So those structural adjustments, again, I think you're all familiar with this. You've all been watching and observing this. Online retail and home delivery services has been a sort of winner from this situation. Those businesses that have got that as part of their business model, and clearly we're all on Zoom now. Technology companies have also, certain aspects of technology have seen a big boost in terms of the benefits that they've gained from COVID. It was seen last week when they announced the vaccine that the share price of Zoom went down significantly. So some sectors have benefited hugely from how important they have become and how dependent we have become on their business models. The most resilient models, if you could put it that way, those organizations that can accommodate homeworking. And those particularly in retail that can switch to online service model. It may not be retail, but something that the business model can work as an online service delivery mode. And on the other ones is that those organizations, those services, particularly public services, but not just those. I mean, some aspects of retail have been in the early part of the first stage of lockdown, a number of categories of things that we hadn't previously thought of as essential, but then suddenly were. People who work in supermarkets, for example. And the ones that are most adversely affected, as again, we'll all be familiar with, is frontline public services. Particularly, we remember those TV footages from hospitals and staff in PPE, with the lack of PPE and the kind of notion there that it was potentially dangerous being in those public services, in public service frontline work and those early stages. So they were affected in terms of they were carrying on with their work, but at that early stage, at least, it was dangerous, and it's still going to continue to affect their work as we see this services on the health service and also in care, in the care sector, and also in hospitality and retail, the most negatively affected. So on the bleakest of the issues there, if you look at this, this is the issue on redundancies again from recent ONS data, and this is over a long period of time. You'll see there what they're projecting is a pretty bleak graph. It's reaching a peak there that we haven't seen since on this one at least, since the peak of the global financial crisis in 2008. And in terms of unemployment, I can't see the end of this graph because my face is on the screen obscuring it, but hopefully you can see it. The projection there for unemployment is going to be hitting. I mean, you can see there's a variety of scenarios there, but unemployment, it's going to start rising from here. there's a lag between the impacts of these of COVID and when it's going to start hitting. So let's go back to the olden days. Let's start like February last year, or February, sorry, this year, before COVID-19 happened. On homeworking, so ONS, again, looking at Office for National Statistics, they did a survey in 2019, so that's quite recent and prior to the effects of COVID-19. And we can see here that homeworking was a thing. I think that's going to surprise people here to know that there are and have been, and it has been an issue, homeworking as something, as a way of working in the past before COVID-19. But on this previously, obviously, this was on an issue about a business need and or about work-life balance issues rather than sort of public safety. You can see there, so 1.7 million regular home workers, 4 million people who declared in the survey that they'd worked from home in the last week, 8.7 million who had ever been in its sectors where it was the most popular, declared there in the terms of the data, the way that the ONS collected the data was in information technology, science, finance, and professional services. I put HR in there as I suspect HR may well be one of those professional services in organizations that may well be suited to home working, particularly as we also might see HR in the last 20 years or so as being part of the organization that has actively sought to engage with the whole issue of work-life balance and promoting it as good practice. So therefore practicing what they preach, I suspect. Say we haven't got the exact figures on that, but I suspect that will be the case. Those sectors where home working's not really taken off, not surprising here, all those areas that we now see of being at the front end, at the front line of COVID. So transport, retail, hospitality, things that can't be done from home, frankly, things that we can see as on a quite a pragmatic level is not possible. So looking at home working then in a bit more detail, is it good? Is home working good? Well, recently, and this is spurred by the early stages of COVID-19, Alon and colleagues make the assertion that the forced increase in home working is going to have an equalizing effect on gender equality issues. It's going to make more men do home working, where previously this had been much more gendered, in which case those potential disadvantages that women may face in terms of how it may be perceived in terms of work commitment, etc., some of the more negative attitudes that go around some of the work-life balance issues, and that therefore it will normalize this and make it a more equal thing, and make it a sort of a standardized kind of practice, in which case it will have less of it will equalize some of those disadvantages, that particularly career breaks and things like that women have, that's linked to home working. That's one view. We also kind of get a general picture that's where home working has often been linked with the work-life balance agenda, as I previously hinted, particularly with this notion of work-life integration, where home working would be seen to be a good thing. It would be where we take what the organizational psychologists looked at in terms of what they call work-life integration. That is the notion of the positive interrelationship that people put in when they share work and home life. There are attributes to both that can integrate well. And possibly, I think maybe those of us who have been home working have possibly felt some of those, seen some of those kind of benefits, how you can do both of them simultaneously, and it's sort of a practical example of how it all may work out. So the potentially this is a good thing. The less artificial separation of work and home and domestic sphere potentially is a good thing. But it's not all as straightforward as that. Others have also pointed to particularly the issue of work-family conflicts. So particularly time, a resource that cannot be shared, things that you're doing that's a home-related activity or domestic cannot be done when it clashes with your work time. So work-family conflict is a sort of a counter kind of view on that, as is negative spillover, where the notion of stress building in from one sphere into the other can have negative mental health kind of consequences. Work-family conflict goes both ways around as well. So there can be negative consequences of work stress being taken home, and there can be negative home-related kind of stress that can be brought to the workplace. So mixing those together isn't necessarily a straightforward issue. There's also an issue, and this is a special issue of a journal that Alex Beauregard and colleagues edited recently, which is on the issue of work-life balance, and possibly we're missing some things here about intersectionality, and how the notions and choices that certain people have for the opportunities to do well. And pre-COVID wasn't equal, hasn't necessarily been equal in terms of the choices that people are offered. On a slightly different point, and again, picking up on more of the dangers and risks involved in this, if home working does become a much more normalized aspect of working life, then what happens to all of those activities that we have all based, the notion of how careers, etc., are structured, etc., and the informal and the social actions that are involved in that, particularly in terms of social networks, etc., how you build social networks, how you ingratiate yourself in colleagues and into organizations, what might it be in the future? Is I can actually sort of say it. I know that people who have started working at the university, I'm quite new at the university, but that we've actually had new starters at the university who've started and have never actually been in the building yet. This may be something in the future that may be a more normal situation. What are the issues there? And if we do get that, and if there is more home working, and some of that home working, whereas in the past we've had issues about HR potentially attempting to enforce good practice in organizations and facing possible gatekeeper issues from line managers in situations who are not keen on this home working and work-life balance issue. That's a sort of unknown thing. But if this was reversed, and now it was sort of seen as slightly more of in the future, that the privileged elite were the ones that did have the office and did have a space in the workplace, and everybody else were kind of working from home at distance, etc., and a new glass ceiling kind of emerges that sort of possibly counter to the ones that we have been used to in the past. Are all home office environments equal? I mean, probably somebody will remember this clip. This was funny at the time. It's kind of ones that we probably see quite a lot on Zoom now, people working from home. So all home environments, if our working environment is going to be our home, we can know that all homes are not equal. So I'll come back to that a bit later on in terms of potential HR sort of hazards. Now, the Agile agenda, I'm going to zing through a little bit here. The Agile agenda is something that's been around for a few years. And it's kind of a bit of a mixture of things. And this is partly what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, to be honest. We've kind of got a narrative from business leaders. I'll pick out some key points here. This was from a letter sent to the Telegraph as a forum that was set up to promote Agile working as a sort of business-led kind of initiative. But it's about challenging kind of traditional ways about working. Linda Holbeck wrote a whole book about it, again, very much oriented towards a practitioner audience. And it's kind of probably what you might expect it to, a lot of this. Probably a bit more helpful, I think, is the CIPD's own publication. We can pin it down to this. So Agile working for the CIPD is about time issues, it's about location issues, it's about the role, and it's about the issue of, the most controversial, frankly, is about the issue of who is employed. What is the status of people's contractual relationship with the organizations? I'm going to skip this a little bit, but in terms of academic, there is a thin and a bit of a patchy kind of academic sort of background to what might constitute Agile. A lot of it originated from ergonomics, about the way that office space is designed. And it also came around from issues around software development and about building teams.
Ian, you have 5 minutes.
Right, so I'm going to zing a bit now. But there's also been some issue about links to work-life balance agenda. So I don't know any of you that may remember this. One of the things about Agile that is one of the things that comes across quite quickly for any of you seen this model before, but this was the 1984 model of the flexible firm, where we were introduced to particularly the issues of a core periphery model of the firm and of the issues of numerical flexibility and functional flexibility. Widely criticized by academics, the actual original article was a four-page piece, but everybody remembers that diagram. And despite its the academic community not being keen and criticizing it, often on they couldn't find evidence of its being strategically applied, it remains visible in terms of large organizations' actual practice. So if we were to make the comparison, there's a bit of an issue as I pointed there. Is Agile then so new, or is it just a reinvention or just a rebadging of what we've kind of got used to and already know about? So I would sort of say in many ways, yes, it is. So both Agile and flexible firm model promote the issue of functional flexibility, the idea of people's tasks and the things they do should be variable. Numerical flexibility, again, that's the most contentious issue here, because it's the one that divides the workforce into employees and non-employees, and the growth of zero-hours contracts and all these kinds of freelancing and these new forms of contracting and work that's not employment. The one that's disappeared a bit was the financial flexibility. A lot of that was about performance-related pay. But what's new is this notion of location flexibility. It was kind of implied a little bit in flexible firm, but not directly. So I think that's the kind of area where homeworking, it combines location and temporal flexibility, working time issues into one thing. So let me go actually to the role of HR. So these are some speculations, and this is what really where I'm at the moment and where I would like to what I like to explore, what I'm trying to put together something, and it's a moving target. So I think the original had some ideas about doing this as a consequence of COVID, but I think now I'm probably interested to sort of see is the new normal, what will happen when COVID's gone, and what will be the permanent consequence of this. I see that recently there was something about homeworking that Deutsche Bank published, saying that there may be such a permanent shift that they may even affect the way that we tax organizations. And I picked up on something yesterday that said the exact opposite from Australia, talking about how organizations should cross-subsidize homeworking. So again, it's our live issue. For HR, homeworking then is the kind of the most visible thing, I think, the issues. And for HR on homeworking, the when and where issues, will there be an issue about, will this lead to more work-life integration, positive or negative spillover, the more negative aspects? What will the role in HR of this be? Are all homes and family environments equal? Clearly they're not. To what extent then does the office space, is the organization going to have some responsibility, a duty of care for those people who aren't, unlike in franchise situations or freelancers or contractors or self-employed, people who are working directly for the organizations whose place of work will be at home? What's HR's role in making sure that that's a safe environment, particularly in relation to mental health, which again, we're sort of familiar with and what we've seen some of the headlines issues. And then also in terms of equality, I mentioned before that the risk, not necessarily a certainty, but a risk that new divisions of labor could emerge if there are certain groups of workers now find themselves permanently working from home and others now possibly seen as in a more privileged position who have the office. Second point, reasonable adjustments. This is mentioned in some of the business promotion of Agile before, particularly there's the issue of phased retirement has been an issue, and about how Agile working practices can be used to manage that, particularly with our aging population. But you can see there is also an important issue on equality related issues. We know about reasonable adjustments in relation to disability, but also reasonable adjustments in terms of requests and things about maternity and childcare, other responsibilities and caring responsibilities. And finally, good, I managed to get it, did get it on time, even if a little rushed, numerical flexibility. This is definitely the most contentious and possibly a little bit under the radar in terms of how COVID may be affecting this, but I think we can, potentially these have been the people who've been furloughed. the people who are the easiest to get rid of, the ones that I'm sure, HR will know about. But one of the things that's a mystery with all of this is for people who are on 0-hours contracts, who are freelancers, people who work for the in the organization, do work for the organization, but are not employed by the organization. What is HR's role and responsibility? One of the things that has interested me for a while is, when you have an organization, even if you sort of take the flexible firm model, what is HR's role? Because if these people are not employees, they're not hired per se, they're contracted. What is HR's role in a whole range of issues in terms of their people's conduct, about their career prospects, etc.? Is there a role? And the final point, if anybody remember any of this, but this is one of the kind of rationales for why HR exists in the first place, the Ronald Coase theorem, who's theorized 30, 40, actually maybe 50, 60 years ago, the dilemma and the mystery as to why in a market economy, when everything is said to be most efficiently allocated in terms of resources, most efficiently allocated when we have supply and demand, customers and suppliers, etc. Why is it that in organizations, that we still employ people on open-ended permanent contracts? And why not on the spot market? You just bring people in like markets, free market economics would suggest. And it is partly, the short answer is transaction costs and the difficulty, and there's possibly other things that all the issues there about structured antagonism and all these various issues as well. Is that now, with the creation and the stuff about the gig economy and the fact that you can get platforms, etc., have those transaction costs been so reduced that organizations maybe can, and maybe in the future that will? Some people have I'm skeptical, but again, for HR, does this remove HR from the equation entirely for some categories of workers, which may be a growing part of the workforce? And I'll finish on that point.
Thank you very much, Ian, and that was really, really interesting. I really appreciated to hear all about that. I'm sure lots of people have questions as well, so hold on to those questions. We're going to hear from our second speaker, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to post those questions in the chat. So Ian, if you can stop sharing your screen now, and then Maria can load her slides up. So thank you very much. So our next speaker is Dr. Maria Hudson. Maria is a senior lecturer in organisation studies and human resource management. Her research interests are connected to the study of inequalities in work, labour markets and the wider society. She's undertaken research for numerous sponsors, for example, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Department for Work and Pensions, ACAS, the Commission for Racial Equality and the Low Pay Commission. And today Maria will share her research on how to build an employer action learning set to improve mental health in the workplace. The outcomes of this process include learners reflecting on their own mental health and well-being and combating a sense of HR manager isolation. So thank you very much, Maria. Over to you.
Thank you, Danielle, and good afternoon, everyone. Ian touched on the importance of mental health and the impact on mental health of the current pandemic context. And this afternoon, I'd like to kick off with some discussion of the nature of action learning and provide some insights into how I built an action learning project at Essex Business School, focusing on mental health. We'll then move on to some research findings on how the well-being of HR professionals benefited from their participation in action learning, and I'll then provide a few concluding remarks. So what is an action learning set? Well, action learning, it's a form of reflective and collaborative problem solving. It involves setting up an action learning set consisting of a small group of people who have a shared interest in active learning and change, whether change at the individual or organisational level. This small group typically involves peers at similar levels of responsibility in their organisations who meet with each other at regular intervals with a facilitator. So the action learning set structure both supports and also challenges the participants in an action learning set. And if we think about the process via which this supporting and challenging takes place, this diagram provides a feel, I think, for the action learning set meeting process. And you can see there's a kind of strong dynamic of learning by doing in a structured learning environment. So the meetings involve quite a heavy emphasis on collaborative learning, including sharing challenges, reflection on those challenges, and committing and planning to take action that will be reported and reflected upon in subsequent meetings. So why action learning with employers and HR managers around mental health? Well, some of you may remember that a few years ago at the first CIPD Essex and Ipswich branch annual event held at Essex Business School, I gave a talk on the findings from some qualitative research that I undertook for ACAS on the management of mental health at work, which looked at challenges in promoting positive mental health and better practice. I outlined some cases of better practice. And I felt that action learning was potentially a creative way to share some of that learning with practitioners, with a view to supporting organisational change around mental health, and perhaps that kind of activity is even more important in the current context. So why critical action learning? Well, I think critical action learning acknowledges the collaborative, deliberative, co-creative and reflective dimensions of action learning, and allows us to see that it involves a couple of key dimensions, one of which are structures that reflect, so that the learning set format really encourages and drives reflection, and structures that connect. Relationships are really pivotal to critical action learning processes. And as Ram and Trehan note, it aims to promote a deepening of critical thinking about the daily realities of participants, including in their working lives as action learning progresses. And I think potentially, and certainly commentators have argued that potentially critical action learning can be quite transformational, both in terms of some of the possibilities for change at an organisational level, as well as at an individual level. So I took forward this idea of building an employer action learning set at Essex Business School, and I'll just give you a little insight to what that entailed very briefly. So I publicised the opportunity to participate in the project, and in so doing tried to recognise and tap into a wider community of learners, and that led initially to 7 participants from a range of employers forming an action learning set. So the participants were HR managers, or had a strong HRM element involved in their day-to-day roles. And in building the action learning set, I also had an emphasis on quite an inclusive approach on a number of levels. So one of those levels included involving employers of different sizes and sectors, and also at different stages of policy and practice development, with a view to kind of really enriching the range and variety of organisational contexts and experiences that would be fed into the action learning set meetings and discussions. And I also collaborated with a mental health community interest company called Brentwood Community Print, who had lived experience of mental health, and led on the design of some discussion exercises that could be fed into the action learning set meetings to encourage engagement with lived experience of mental health, and that was part of the criticality that I was trying to feed into the approach. And some of the action learners themselves had mental health conditions, and came to, as the project progressed, they came to share their experiences within the meetings. So the action learning set ran for a period of 12 months, from October 2017 to September 2018, and it was accompanied by some qualitative research and evaluation of the action learning set processes and the action learning set outcomes, and that involved baseline interviews with the action learning set participants at the start of the process early on, and also follow-up interviews at the end of the project. And it's from that data that I'm going to draw on in sharing some of the findings on well-being in a moment. So I just wanted to give you very briefly some insight into the core members of the action learning set. We did have a little bit of attrition early on in terms of the learning set membership, but the core members were from organisations across the private, public and social enterprise sectors, which provided some of the diversity and experience that we were trying to feed into the learning process. And it was important to have that commitment from a core group of members, because it's really important in terms of the ongoing collaborative nature of the action learning approach. So just to also give you a feel for the ongoing nature of that approach and the regularity of meetings, this next slide conveys how in total we had 6 bi-monthly, 1-day meetings. And there was an aim here to deliberately get participants away from their workplaces. So all the meetings took place on our Colchester campus, either at Wivenhoe House or Essex Business School. And each meeting had a particular theme running through it, linked to the management of mental health at work, and tied into typically the research that I'd recently undertaken for ACAS. And I can also give you a feel for the kind of structure of the meetings. This slide indicates an indicative meeting, and how there were kind of different stages and activities running through the meeting, a range of activities involving participants in dialogue with each other, with myself as an action learning set facilitator, and Brentwood's Community and Print, the community interest company, as a facilitator, as well as external contributors. So there were a range of activities that were fitted into the days that we had with each other. So kind of taking a closer look now at the work orientations and experiences of the participants in the action learning set, the action learners themselves. They had a range of aspirations. And at the first meeting, I asked them to explore their aspirations, and they kind of conveyed that they were keen to derive from their involvement in the project both positive intra-organisational outcomes as well as inter-organisational outcomes. And there was a very clear message here that they weren't only seeking to benefit their organisations and colleagues in terms of the promotion of better mental health at work through their learning and through their activities working on organisational challenges as the project progressed. But they also were very keen to also engage with their own mental health and well-being and their need for self-care. And they hoped that the action learning set would be a potential source of support for this. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to just provide some insight into how the action learning set meetings and the interactions that took place and conversations that took place during those meetings did provide that support. And what I'll do is draw on some quotations to allow the action learners to in a sense, speak for themselves in terms of what they felt the benefits were for their well-being. So the first theme that I'd like to highlight here is how at the start of an action learning set, it's really important that ground rules are set out as a kind of informal learning set contract between set members on the action learning values and ways of working together. So things like Chatham House rules, treating each other with respect, being able to leave the room if people felt that they kind of needed a bit of a time out. This kind of set of ground rules help the action learners feel that the meetings were a safe space. And this quotation from one of the learners is indicative of how confidence and trust in sharing experiences and discussing organisational challenges grew through the time working with the action learning set members. And I think that this group of action learners did actually gel very quickly. So next, some participants explained how they felt very isolated in their roles and felt that they lacked support in dealing with organisational challenges, and you know, those feelings could come from different places. In terms of, for example, one person who was very much the sole HR person within her organisation, while others could just feel, while there were a wider range of colleagues, there were certain issues that they didn't really feel that they could talk about with their colleagues. And I think that the emphasis on interorganisational learning in the action learning set meetings really helped to nurture and bolster a wider sense of a community of practice. And this also seemed to help ease feelings of insecurity and provide a measure of validation that action learners were kind of on the right track in their efforts to better support mental health in their workplaces. And I think this quote, you know, really kind of illustrates this. The part I've highlighted here is, and I needed that because I was in such an isolated role. You need people sometimes to tell you that you're on the right track with stuff. I think another strong theme that came out of the action learning set was how much the action learners valued the time out from the hurly-burly of their working week that the action learning set meetings gave them. And this next quotation is from an action learner who's really here conveying how much she appreciated having time to just step back and think rather more theoretically and conceptually about mental health at work in a way that just in the kind of day-to-day intensity of activities and claims on her time, that she just routinely wouldn't have the opportunity to do. So yeah, a very strong theme about the importance of that protected time for reflection to really take place, and how that supported a sense of well-being. And a further theme was around how mental health could be supported through reflection on lived experience. There's some positive action learner feedback here, and this was linked to the exercises that I mentioned a moment ago were developed by Brentwood's Community Print, where members of this community interest company fed in their experiences of living with mental health conditions into hypothetical scenarios and stories around mental health at work. And you know, there was some really positive feedback around this, and the value of engaging with lived experience and reflecting on lived experience in terms of supporting learning. At the same time, some of the action learners found this challenging, as some of that lived experience was very, very personal. And at the bottom of this slide, along with a typo I see in vignettes, you'll see that there's a link to a toolkit that arose from the action learning set that provides, brings together the exercises that were designed for the project and that we use during the action learning set meetings. If you want to check out that resource. It was very clear, I think, that the action learners were prompted to reflect on their own working lives and their own mental health and well-being in coming together. And the space to reflect was sometimes a spur to make changes. And the quotation here indicates how a learner who felt quite overloaded at work, with the intensity of work, made a decision to kind of restructure how mental health at work was being managed. And she had quite a pivotal role in activities around managing mental health at work. And the changes that she was able to make through this self-reflection on her own mental health and well-being, and some of the factors that were driving it, is something that, or using her words, she says, I think it's made me reflect that actually there's no shame in handing something off. If somebody can take it even further, I don't need to hang on to everything. Letting stuff go is quite liberating. Actually, so kind of having the time out through the action learning set really kind of empowered her to make some changes, easing her work pressures. And actually, in the end, she felt that those structural changes that she made improved the engagement with mental health within her organisation. I think there was also an important theme here around the value of relationships built through action learning sets, expanding professional networks. And again, there was a link here to supporting well-being, and this was evident in the relationships that were built between the sets members.
Maria, you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. And the action learning set also provided some links to other practitioners. And if you look at a couple of the photos on this this slide, the one in the top left-hand corner is some external speakers who joined the Action Learning set from Suffolk Council, talking about their innovative mental health forum and network that they'd set up. And the picture down in the bottom left-hand corner shows a senior advisor from ACAS, who leads on mental health for ACAS, join the learners for a session, and sharing her experiences, particularly around the business case around engaging with mental health with the action learners. So again, kind of building support through enriching relationships and networks was supportive of the well-being of the participants. And just a few concluding remarks. I think that my experience of working with this group of action learners showed that action learning can support the well-being of HR managers. The examples that I've just provided indicate that this can be done via building confidence in sharing feelings and experiences, and there's a sense in which for some of the participants, their kind of emotional intelligence perhaps was enhanced by the engagement that they had with each other within the meetings. It can be done via the well-being of HR managers can also be supported via an erosion of a sense of isolation and building a sense of a support network. And in addition, there's running through, I think, as well, is a fostering of greater self-awareness around self-care and mental health and well-being. And I think arguably these are things that are even more needed in the times that they're living in the current pandemic context. I think the project also yielded wider organisational benefits of reflective, deliberative and collaborative problem-solving learning that I don't really have time to share today. But if you have a look at the resources kit that was generated by the project that I mentioned a moment ago, there are case studies based on the learner experiences that give some insight into some of the organisational outcomes, and again here there's a link to that, and I think that in due course Danielle will be sending you copies of slides, so you'll be able to perhaps follow the link if you have an interest in this area. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was, again, a fascinating talk as well. Thank you very much for sharing your research with us. So the chat is now open for you to be posting questions there. If you can give an indication of who the question's for as well, whether it's for Ian about Agile working or to Maria about the Action Learning set, that will help me as well to field those questions to the right people. But we have questions coming in already. So we're going to start off with a question from Maria. So first question, do you think businesses should be doing more within their organisations for their staff around mental health and well-being? Many have implemented mental health first aiders. However, is that enough in your opinion?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think that mental health first aid is very important. I've done a mental health first aid course myself. I know what it consists of, and I think that it's the knowledge and the experience that it gives you is is invaluable. So I'm a great fan of that. But I mean, I would argue that it's not sufficient. There's been quite a lot of emphasis in discussions around mental health at work around the importance of challenging the stigma that surrounds mental health, and I think that is really important. But I also think that we need to engage with the often structural processes that may be making mental health worse or making it more difficult for us to manage mental health. And I spoke about some of the participants, or touch very briefly on some of the Action Learning Set participants' experiences of work intensification, which can be, you know, a reflection of some of the broader structural pressures that organisations are under and that are being transmitted to the workforce. And I think that you know, that ties into you know, a wider kind of political economy that is shaping mental health at work, and how it is and how it's being managed. I think that action learning, one of the things that attracts me to action learning is that it provides an opportunity for us to really try to engage with the challenges that are generated by organisational contexts, and to engage with some of those bigger questions around the structural pressures that may be helping to shape mental health at work. So I think that, you know, there's more that there is more that needs to be done. I mean, I could go on. I think there's also a gap between the policies that we have as employers around mental health at work and what's actually happening in practice. And you know, we need to engage with why that gap takes place. Again, I think that action learning potentially provides a tool for us to have those discussions around the dissonance between the policies that we have and what's actually happening in practice.
Thank you, Maria. That was really interesting. And I mean, actually, I'd like to bring in Ian here as well, because I mean, I certainly, from listening to presentations, saw quite a lot of parallels there, you know, between talking about home working and the potential mental health issues around that. So I was just wondering, Ian, is there anything from your research as well about whether mental health and what organisations can do to support mental health in the context of home working that might be relevant to this discussion as well?
Actually, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, maybe I'm not getting questions here as well, is that I've threw up lots of questions as much as anything else, and observations. There's some theories around sort of what's going on. And actually, I don't know, but those are the things that I'm interested in finding more about, because I think it's actually, if I'm right, and COVID-19 and is accelerating some of these trends, etc., and if we have moved from the idea that work-life balance is something that was going to benefit people in terms of their mental health, going to remove some of those work-family conflict issues potentially, or help with that, and if it goes well, then that potentially could be good for mental health. But if it doesn't, and some of those more negative issues about the stress involved in having to work from home as opposed to being allowed to work from home, and it could go either way. I suspect it will go both ways in different organizational contexts, and I'm interested to sort of find out more, but probably when the lockdown's finished, when everything has settled, and you know, because clearly it's a stressful situation in the circumstances we find ourselves, but when this becomes a voluntary thing, as opposed to a kind of lockdown kind of thing, then I think they get some more interesting answers.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for that insight as well. So, Maria, going back to you now. Maria, do you feel that a lot of wellbeing initiatives that organisations are implementing are tokenistic? It can feel that companies are just box ticking currently, and employees' feedback is reflective of this in some instances. So, do you think that wellbeing initiatives are often tokenistic? And also, what do you think we could do about that to make them have more substance?
Well, I mean, I've come across a better practice in the management of mental health at work, and lots of examples of good practice. But in looking at those organisations, there are, often tensions in terms of some of the policy and practice changes that are made, and the realities of people's working lives. So sometimes you have a sense that employers try to foster improvements in mental health and well-being without really fully engaging with some of the drivers that may be having an impact. And there are tensions in there, and I think it can lead to some cynicism around employer commitment to taking action around mental health at work, and that feeling that that it really is a tick box exercise. I think that in order to start that process of engaging with that, there's a need to listen to employees more about their experiences, and perhaps in this climate where we're working very much in a virtual context, that becomes even more important. I think it can be difficult when you're working remotely within a team to have a sense of how people are doing, that people may be less inclined to share how they're doing. So, I mean, that's another way in which companies really need to engage with the organisational context that they have, and how those are playing out, so that the initiatives that they do introduce do really engage with the realities of people's working lives. I think one of the real challenges, and this is something that came out of a lot of our discussions within the learning set, is that employers can feel that some of the structural context in which they're working can be beyond their control. And I think it can be useful to make a distinction between the importance of engaging with stigma and the importance of engaging with stigmatization, in terms of, again, some of those kind of broader, the way in which we live and operate as a society, and the choices that we make as a society that help to shape the structural context in which companies operate, and kind of then in turn help to shape the experiences that individuals have within the workplace. So I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying that there's maybe not enough thinking out of the box that takes place, and organisations do feel kind of hemmed into kind of trying to do their best in a set of difficult circumstances, when they feel that those circumstances may need to change, but they don't quite know how to how to change them. A good example of that, I guess, is if we think about the NHS and the staffing pressures that the NHS are under, and the greater investment that's needed in staffing in order to help to alleviate those pressures. Without engaging with that structural issue, how do you really begin to engage with issues around stress and the intensification of work and the knock-on impact that that has on people leaving the nursing profession because they become burned out? And in that context, you can have fabulous well-being initiatives, but if you're not engaging with the nitty-gritty of some of those issues, then of course people are going to feel that those initiatives aren't going to really, make much of a difference, and they are going to be cynical, and they are going to feel that they're tick boxing organisations. So we need to really engage with some of the bigger issues, the bigger questions that form the context for our mental health and well-being.
Thanks, Maria. That was a very, very detailed answer. Lots of good ideas and stuff in that. We also have a slightly more technical question specifically about the learning sets as well that's come through to me. Do you think there's an ideal size for learning sets? And is there an ideal number of meetings until you achieve productive results?
Oh, they're very technical questions. I've only run one action learning set from my worldly experience, and from some of the feedback of the participants. I mean, as I mentioned in my little talk, we kind of settled down to a core of 5 participants, and some of the feedback was that they would have liked to have had a few more, but though not too many more. So I think that around representation from 8 organisations would have been a good balance. So I went with meetings every 2 months. So we had 6 meetings over the course of a year, and that seemed to work really well because all the participants were very busy, and they'd kind of committed to working on an organisational challenge and trying to achieve some change around that. And having that space between the meetings actually gave them that opportunity to really work on their challenge and have something to feed back on and discuss at the next meeting. So I think that there's a need with action learning sets to kind of be realistic about, if you really are going to embrace that ethos on working on challenges and working on meaningful challenges, to really allow enough time for that work to take place. Because yes, the action learning sets themselves are really important structures in support of action learning, but outside of those action learning sets, there's also work being done by the action learning set participants in trying to work on an aspect of organisational change, which involves engaging with other colleagues within their organisations.
Thanks, Maria. And there was one more question for you as well about starting out with the wellbeing strategy, but we think you've probably answered quite a lot of that in the answer you gave just before. So if you want to have a look in the chat, and if there's anything you want to add, please feel free. I think we'll take the last question then for Ian before we move into the break. So Ian, you referenced Agile and home working being the new norm. Where there is a hybrid way of working, with some team members being in the workplace and others being at home or working remotely, what have you picked up on how you can make this work from a team and collaboration perspective?
Well, again, I haven't managed to get any primary data on any of these things. These are the kinds of, in fact, your questions are actually useful for me to ponder. I mean, anecdotally, I'd sort of say that these kind of situations already exist and have existed prior to COVID. I'd say anecdotally, a friend of mine has worked for the building inspector, I think is the thing, for the National Federation, and he's always worked. No, he hasn't always worked. He's worked for a significant part of his career from home, and then meets in regional to meet with his colleagues, etc. So that's been a fairly well established way of working. I think in that situation, well, two things that sort of strike me on that is, one is it's established, but wouldn't have been his entire career experience. And he went through a traditional kind of sort of relationship, working in a traditional workplace with colleagues and people who you meet. And then when you move into the situation, when you're working exclusively from home, I think it probably works. It sort of takes me back a little bit to those arguments they made about the same time as I was mentioning the flexible firm. They also had these, it was quite a lot of talk about portfolio careers and how people will move to a less traditional way of structuring their career, etc. And what some of the research came back on that is, whilst it seemed like a good aspiration, they found that people were in that situation didn't do that from scratch. People who found themselves building a kind of portfolio career had people who'd got quite a bit of experience, built up quite a lot of networks, sort of social capital, so to speak, in order that they could then develop themselves from there. If in the future we find a situation that people start from day one as a home worker, will they ever integrate into the organization? So yeah, I think you can imagine situations where you have organizations where some people are remote working all the time, and that's partly what I'm sort of very, very much interested in. I'm open to the idea that this could work very well and people like it, and I'm also open to the idea that there will be variations on this, and some people will like it less. But I think a lot of the thing would be about when it starts from day one, as opposed to how people adapt to it, part way through their career.
Thanks very much, Ian. And this is kind of the end of the first part of the session now. If you do have any other questions, we're going to leave the chat open during the break now. So feel free to keep posting those questions there if you have anything you'd like to follow up on as well. So we're going to take a short break now, coming back at 4:30. And then in the second part of the session, we're going to have John Toplis and Amanda Whiteford are going to talk about the importance of wellbeing in job and career choice. But I hope you all join me in thanking our two speakers today, Ian Roper and Maria Hudson, for sharing their research with us today and their really insightful views. So thank you very much, Ian and Maria, and I hope you enjoy the break. We'll be back at 4:30.
Right, so it's 4:30. If I can just very briefly pass across to Jackie before we move into the final presentation that we have from John and from Amanda. Jackie, are you there?
I am here. So I just wanted to say a very brief thank you to one of our very long-standing committee members from what was the Colchester and Ipswich group, part of our branch, now North Essex and Ipswich. Julie mentioned his name earlier on, Terry Wales. Terry Wales tells us that he's been 36 years as a CIPD member and 28 years on our committee, which is absolutely extraordinary. Terry, I don't know if you can kind of put your video on so that we can see your lovely little face and what you're thinking about what I'm saying. Taught for over 20 years on CIPD qualifications at both Suffolk College and now University, the University of Suffolk. But before that, I had a background in HR. And one of the huge things that Terry has done for us over the years has been the organiser of our annual employment law event. We used to have Olga Aitken running that event for us. And that event raised over £25,000 for group and branch funds, which I'm sure has supported us over the years to run really good events for our members. So Terry, I can see your face. I haven't seen you for ages since lockdown, so we just want to say a huge thank you to you for everything you've done. You will be sorely missed by us as a committee. Your enthusiasm, sometimes your dry sense of humour, your opportunity to get us all thinking about a nice glass of red wine, and everything that you've done for us over the years. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciated it.
Thanks very much for those kind words, Jackie. And I have to say that despite everything, I've really enjoyed it. It's really nice to be involved in the HR community. It's really nice to feel it's putting something back. And in particular for me, you know, it's been about the liaison between the student body, the CIPD student body, you know, with the college and then the university and the CIPD, the professional association. That's sort of what I've seen as my role, and that's what I've enjoyed doing. And I hope that that people have enjoyed and benefited from that. But thanks very much for those kind words.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And sorry we can't spend a bit more time with you, but I need to hand back control to those who are going to take us into the next part of the session. Thank you, Terry. Bye.
Yeah, and thank you, Terry. And moving from a former member of a group committee member to our former chair, as I mentioned earlier, and the brainchild of this event, I will say no more, and I will see if I can share my slides as I pass across to John.
Right. Well, thanks, Julie. As Daniel said, I drafted the programme for this event at the start of 2020. And the basic idea was that Essex University staff would discuss some of the challenges facing CIPD members, and that Amanda and I would then encourage you to think about your personal roles and what you might do next in terms of your personal development and career. I had in mind we might even allow some time for co-counselling with the person sitting next to you, and how things have changed in recent months. If you haven't been there, this is the outside of the former railway station, Manchester Central, where the CIPD has held its annual conference in recent years. Here's an internal view of the centre last year, and this is what it looks like today. It's now called the NHS Nightingale Hospital Northwest. So the impact of coronavirus may have led to some of you being unemployed, while others have spent recent months furloughing the staff and making people redundant, aspects of HR work which you probably never appealed to you. So deciding what to do next may be important for some of you. And the aim of these final sessions is to remind you of how you make those decisions. Co-counselling with a person sitting next to you is not possible. But if you would like to talk things over with a professional colleague, can offer help to others, or would welcome co-counselling, do put your name and contact details in the chat box, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. So where to start? The traditional view of job and career choice is that there should be a matching process between the requirements of the job and what the applicant can offer. But where do you start? With researching the world of work and the huge number of jobs and careers available, or with some self-analysis about what you want and what you can offer? Because information about the world of work is so great, people usually start with what they want and what they can offer. The next slide shows aspects of HR work that I enjoy, including finding and developing talent, identifying job applicants and others who are economical with the truth. I enjoy using psychometrics to get insight into abilities and personalities, and investigating problems such as high labor turnover that can have many possible causes. But what would be on your list? Possible features of HR work that you may wish to have in your next job can be found in the professional map, on the CIPD website, by looking at articles in personnel management, by reading books and journals, and by attending meetings and conferences. Indeed, one of the advantages of HR work is the range of activities that fall under the HR umbrella, so that the profession can accommodate a very wide range of abilities, skills, and personalities. But could more be done? If you Google studies of well-being, you'll find that many have been carried out on healthcare professionals, blue light staff, etc. But where are the studies of the well-being of HR managers? Such information would be helpful when people are thinking of making their career in HR, or taking stock of their HR careers. Such studies would be important because it isn't just the things that people enjoy about a job or career that need to be taken into account, but also what some people dislike. Professor Alec Roger called these features difficulties and distastes. Here are some examples. First, I doubt if I'm alone in coming across a manager so determined that a favored subordinate should take over from him that he manipulated the assessment procedure in his subordinate's favor. Next, I know of a competent and committed charity worker who has been furloughed because of the pandemic. In her absence, she was not told that a selection procedure had been started to fill a senior post for which she was well qualified. She returned to work to find that an inexperienced person had been appointed and that she was expected to report to the new person. Then there's a story of a chief executive who offered a new member of staff to a team with no vacancies. Confronted with verbal evidence that the new person had a questionable track record, the chief executive later produced a glowing written reference and imposed her will. The team leader felt that the chief executive had abused her power and resigned shortly afterwards. Next, I know one top manager who is well known for turning around failing companies. Once appointed, he would insist on bringing a team of managers with him. One of his HR team specialized in finding fault with existing managers so that they could be dismissed, a sort of HR hitman. Presumably that job was well paid, but would you want it? Don't think that senior posts are problem-free. My next example concerns the HR director of a professional organization. Some senior staff wanted their relatives and friends to be recruited without going through the normal selection procedures. He refused because he wanted to maintain standards and to be fair to all, and was asked to leave. My final example concerns a newly appointed personnel director. After his first tour of the factory with the owner, they discussed a lady that they had just met. During the discussion, the owner said that the lady would never be promoted because of her Catholic faith. Having moved to take up a home to take up the post, the personnel director was in no position to walk out, and 6 months later, he had his first heart attack. And what sort of person would you want to be your line manager? Even if you're desperate for a job or to move on, would you be willing to work for either of the following? First, Donald Trump. Try to put his political views to one side and consider his track record as a manager. The turnover among his A team of top advisors was recently calculated at 91% a year, some lasting just a few days. Since the recent election result, it is likely to have been even higher. Alternatively, Sir Philip Green, who sold British Home Stores, a retail chain, leaving a deficit in its pension fund of £571 million. He eventually paid £363 million towards the deficit. Although his personal fortune has been estimated at $2.1 billion, he is now seeking others to invest £30 million to secure the future of his other retail businesses. He remains Sir Philip, although many have suggested that the honour should be withdrawn. Remember, it's not just a matter of building a relationship with a new chief executive so that your advice will be heeded, but of getting the chief executive to both to agree to HR policies and then follow them. Were you to work for either of the above, I suspect much of your time would be spent clearing up the consequences of their decisions, if indeed you were there long enough. For many of us, another critical reason is to find out about the people that we will be working with and for and with. What are your team and thinking styles, and will they be valued, particularly by your line manager? If you're currently employed and are disappointed about how things are at present, do take stock before deciding to stay put or trying to move on. As an insider, you will know how well you're fitting in and be better placed to find out if your current organization is financially sound and whether there are likely to be better times ahead. And if your line manager is the problem, could you report to someone else or be seconded? If you do decide to move on, working in a sector which reflects your values may be important to you, be it commercial, public service, or charities, and other not-for-profit organizations. And there are other organizations whose products you admire, or perhaps some whose aims you would find difficult to endorse. For example, I would not wish to work for tobacco companies or gambling businesses. And in my experience, in charities, you can find both best and worst of management practices. Don't forget to investigate an employer's financial stability in the light of coronavirus and Brexit, and their reputation as an employer as shown on the Glassdoor website. Now let's turn to how you might take stock of yourself, your responsibilities, knowledge, skills, interests, and achievements, so that you can then build your CV and job hunting efforts around them. An advantage of this approach is that it fits in with the systems used by most recruitment agencies. In particular, they want to know about your specialisms and your achievements so that they can match you to the vacancies that they receive. Don't make the mistake of simply telling them that you will turn your hand to anything. It's unlikely that they'll have time to remember you or will want to put you in front of a prospective employer without you having significant relevant experience. For that reason, detail your achievements as well as your responsibility and provide supporting information if you can. You may find it helpful to summarize your thinking about what you can offer under headings of the kind first used by Professor Alec Roger when he worked at a youth prison at Borstal in Kent. The last of the points on his 7-point plan was circumstances. And what he had in mind was whether any of the young offenders had family or friends who could help them to get work in spite of their prison sentences. In these difficult times, do take stock of family, friends, and other contacts that you have. I can give several instances of how family contacts have helped some people into work. Also, remember that voluntary work for charities can be a stepping stone to related employment. Next, let's compare the relative simplicity of this slide with the next slide, which attempts to show the sort of information that comes out of attitude surveys when people talk about what they like and dislike about their work. It's impossible to summarize this slide, but copies will be available. Buried in it may be reminders of features of work that you particularly value or wish to avoid. In attitude surveys, respondents nearly always appeal for better leadership and good communications, and people are often demotivated and move on when these are flawed. Selection procedures seldom allow enough time for candidates to ask detailed questions about these and the many other things that matter to them. Indeed, in the present climate, some employers want unreserved enthusiasm, and savvy candidates will give it in order to get a job offer. Can we move the slide on, please? Thanks. But in my view, it's important for the favoured candidate to have the opportunity to discuss the vacancy in depth and ideally meet with the proposed line manager and key colleagues. Some good people will be reluctant to leave a secure job, even if their current work context and prospects don't suit them. Such discussions can be lengthy, so it might be best to have discussions with each of the candidates judged to be appointable as a separate and final stage in the procedure. So going back to the title of the talk, in my view, well-being may not affect the numbers of applicants, but it may affect the number of job offers that are accepted, and it will certainly affect subsequent commitment and staff turnover. If you want to attract and retain key staff, you need to be able to make mutual judgments about issues related to well-being. Although the HR profession can accommodate a very wide range of abilities, skills, and personalities, not everyone will be able to find their niche. So what other options are available? You may be tempted to visit the Career Service website, which offers to discover your skills and careers, or to recommend that site to others. However, among the many careers it suggested for me were referee, lifeguard, and beauty technician. Do you like the colour of my nail varnish? In fairness, it also suggested I might be a magistrate, and indeed I was a magistrate for 10 years. But it's a voluntary and unpaid post and not a normal career. And when, as with DYSAC, many suggestions are generated, how do you decide between them? Attempts at designing career guidance questionnaires nearly always fall into the trap of making very limited assumptions about the things that will matter to people when choosing their careers. Indeed, some have been based simply on whether people are interested in a potential career and don't take abilities into account at all, as if the only requirement for being a successful brain surgeon is to be interested in brain surgery. Career guidance questionnaires also fail to take account of the policies, procedures, and values that you would want your employer to endorse, whether as an HR professional or working in another function. If I was applying for a senior HR role, I would ideally want the organization's work to be ethical, to have a competent line manager with whom there can be mutual trust, and to have the other features listed on this slide. But will your shopping list be the same as mine? Note too that there are relatively few well-being issues on my list, because when you're job hunting, you don't normally have information about them or the opportunity to assess them. Indeed, you may be in a new job for several months before it is clear what the job is really like. Now let's go back to the matching process. A perfect match is almost impossible. There are too many possible issues, and a lot of information won't be available. In practice, you have to identify the few things that are most important to a job seeker at a point in time, and then focus on them, be they the job content and the prospects, or simply the hours of work and the location. Selecting the most important issues can be a very difficult decision for some, including those with responsibilities as a carer and those who cannot find suitable work locally. Individuals may need support, counselling, or mentoring in order to find a way forward. Another option to consider is self-employment. Remember that for many self-employed people, the biggest challenges are to get work and then to be paid promptly for doing it. Instead of planning to work alone, you may want to approach consultancies who employ staff on a contract basis to see if you could help with some of their work. So there's a lot to think about. When unemployment is high, the lack of progress in finding work can be soul-destroying and can be compounded by complex and unwelcome pressures from family and friends. There may even come a point when you have to put your career plans on hold and take almost any job available in order to keep a roof over your head. But even then, you may want to seek work in a sector in which you would ultimately like to do HR or other work. Whether we're taking stock of our priorities, drafting a CV, or preparing for a selection procedure, most of us can benefit from help, gentle questioning, and encouragement. If you haven't got that support, where can you get it? Some support is available from CIPD HQ, and do look at the sections on the CIPD website. However, many of us volunteer to run a CIPD branch to encourage mutual support on a local basis. So if you want help and advice, can offer it to others, or would welcome some co-counselling, please do put your name and contact details in the chat box. You may also be interested in the mentoring scheme, which Amanda Whitefoot and Pete Bowery will be launching in this branch in 2021. Finally, if you still need help in deciding what to do next, please contact any of the branch committee members or don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Right, okay, with that start then, healthy selfishness. Welcome to the final session from me. So what I want to talk to you about today is healthy selfishness and what it is, and some tools and techniques to share with you about how you can bring some of this into your life. So first of all, what is it and why does it matter? So it's one way of referring to the necessity of looking after ourselves so that we can work effectively, be our best selves at work, both and also at home, and look after other people there. So the concept's also known as self-love. And it's one of those things that's really important. If we neglect ourselves, we can't do our jobs properly. We can't care for the people we need to care for. It's rather like the aeroplanes, when the masks drop down and we're told to put our own on first before we turn to help other people. But typically we neglect to look after ourselves. We think that if we just keep going, it will be fine and we will be fine. And very often we're not. When we're tired and frazzled, we tend to make poorer decisions. We might procrastinate. Our sleep can be disrupted. We may be less patient and more prone to anxiety. Sometimes we'll realize what's happening to us and we can do something about it. Other times we won't. It might be a gradual decline until something goes wrong, and then it can be a crisis point. So how can we take better care of ourselves, yet avoid being utterly selfish and self-centered? And it's actually quite easy. The tools and techniques are straightforward. They're not difficult to use. They don't require training, and you may know many of them already. But it does require determination to use them, particularly at times like this when we're under tremendous pressure. So I want to share some techniques with you today, and I'm going to go through the following with you. The first one is focusing on your role. Are you sure with everything going on that you are focusing on what you have to deliver in your role? And are you delivering the work that contributes to the wider organisational goals? Being clear on what you have to achieve and presumably what you're accountable for will help you see when you're being sidetracked by other people's issues that don't really require your attention. So do take stock each week to just make sure you're focusing on the right things. I'm not advocating being a difficult team member. I'm saying be careful about being pulled in too many directions at once and therefore becoming ineffective, okay? So being focused helps us to say no politely to other people's demands. Diary management. I've got about 4 points here that I want to talk to you about. First of all, do you rush from meeting to meeting without a break? Whether these are physical or virtual meetings, do you give yourself time between the meetings to stop and think? Make sure you've made sensible notes from the previous meeting, you know what you've got to do, you get certain things done, you then prepare for the next meeting, you think about why you're even going, what it is you want to achieve, what your contribution's got to be before you go off and start to interact with new people. If you're not giving yourself time between meetings, please do. Make sure you take 10, 15 minutes between meetings in order to just catch your breath and make sure that you're properly focused. So refusing meetings that run back to back is very sensible. And if people are pushing you, just explain you can't join them either at that time. You might join them a little later, or you might have to leave a little earlier if they can't accommodate you by moving the timing of the meeting, okay? So avoid back-to-back meetings where you can. Are all the meetings you attend really necessary for you to be there? Or could one of your colleagues go there? Or could you receive the minutes and action points afterwards just to review whether your input's needed in any way? Dr. Maria Hudson gave a quote from one of her studies of letting stuff go is quite liberating, actually. And this is one of those moments when perhaps we could be letting go of meetings we really don't need to be attending. So think sensibly, think carefully whether you really need to be there or whether it's a nice to have. If you're going along to meetings because you're worried about your visibility, that's a deeper level conversation with yourself. Why are you worried? What do you think is going to go wrong if you're not there all the time? Think about the tensions about why you might be struggling to let go when you can let go. Delegation is an art and it's one worth learning. Do you factor in time to think? And I don't just mean rushing between meetings. I'm thinking each week, perhaps, taking time to really reflect on what you're doing, what you're achieving, what needs to be done. Because if you don't, you're in danger of behaving like a headless chicken. And I don't think any of us want to be managed by a headless chicken. So can you mark out time each week as a regular thing to make sure you've reflected on the week you've had, what you've achieved, and what you need to do in the week going forward? Make sure that's put in your diary like a meeting that other people can't bump out. It's important that you really think about what you're doing in order to make sure you're being effective, okay? And use that time to relax, have your favorite beverage, go for a walk even. Give your mind time to relax as well as your body. We all have the best ideas when we're least expecting them. Finally, on diary control, do you control your diary? Or is it open to other people to just pop something in? If you can't control your diary, then do make sure that you mark out time, focused pieces of work that require attention to detail. They require thought first, so that you're not continually interrupted by other people. This way you'll feel much sharper and prepare much better. So think about whether you can control your diary, and if you're not, that you take time out of it that other people can't steal away from you. Okay, moving on to technology, 5 points here. Do you control technology, or does the technology control you? Make sure you're the master. This means turning off notifications of programs when you've marked out an hour or two to produce quality work. And turn off your phone too. We all know that silent isn't really silent, that the phone in a silent room vibrates and the screen lights up. It's a distraction. Be kind to yourself. Cut that out for the moment, that period of time that you need for yourself. If you think you really can't turn it off, ask yourself why. Is it possible it's the excuse? Being on call all the time is helping you avoid work that you don't want to do. You're wondering how on earth you're going to start it, and it's feeling quite scary, and it's helping you procrastinate. Stress can bring out very strange behaviours, so make sure you're not finding excuses not to do things that you really ought to be doing. Emails. Allocate time for emails rather than respond to them throughout the day, because they can be a real worry, a real negative voice on our shoulder if we're not careful. So maybe do some first thing in the morning, some at lunchtime, some at the end of the day. Okay, it's very rare that an email comes through that you absolutely have to drop everything for. So go with what will work 90% of the time for you at least. Then think about when you're most alert, whether that's during the morning, the afternoon or evening, and make sure you schedule to do the work where you really need to be at your best, to focus on something that's very detailed and very quality driven. And finally, do you use software well? Do you know what programs can enhance your efficiency? And if not, seek out somebody who's well organized, who uses software well, and ask them what they do and how they do it. There's lots of easy tips for us to use half the time if only we knew them. And here, reverse mentoring can actually be really helpful. So I'll come on to the details of the mentoring scheme at the end. Boundaries. Do you set healthy boundaries around work, family, and relaxation time? And this is really important. And again, this is getting back to this, making sure you're effective to do your job well. Any role can be all-consuming if we let it become so. And if we have fewer calls on our time from family or other people, letting work take over is even easier for us. So what's a reasonable number of hours to work each day? Is it 8 or 9? If you're paid for that time and you've worked effectively and productively, then don't apologise for leaving on time. Make working overtime an exception rather than the rule, okay? And remember, if you're having to work excessive overtime, then people might start to call into question how effective you are at your job and whether you can actually cope. And that may in turn impact your career aspirations. So make sure you're not making that mistake by accident. If you need help with setting boundaries, then try and make commitments to other people that it would be difficult to renege on. This will help to hold your toes to the fire, whether that's getting home or signing off in time to bath your children and read them a story, or taking up a team-based hobby, even virtually, where your absence would be missed. Make those commitments that you can and don't apologise for them. You're entitled to a private life. And build in time to exercise too. That doesn't have to involve a gym or a punishing exercise regime. Walking is a fantastic form of exercise. It's available to the vast majority of us, and it really does help us unwind and relax and think. Maybe listen to music or a book or a podcast, or just daydream, but give yourself that time and space to regroup and relax at the end of the day. To-do lists. I love a to-do list. I'm a big fan of them, but there's a bit of a drawback. If I'm not careful, I look at that wonderful list and I think, right, I'm going to get that all done today. And then when I don't, I feel dissatisfied, as if I've somehow failed, when I haven't actually. I've probably achieved a great deal. So the trick here is to pick 1 or 2 things that you absolutely do need to get done today, that are important and urgent. And then once you've done those, anything else you achieve is a bonus. So just by flipping round or reframing the way you look at that to-do list can make it energizing and a way of congratulating yourself for what you've achieved, rather than the reverse. Monkeys. What do I mean by that? Are you a very helpful person? Constantly asked for support, advice, assistance? If so, the chances are that people will be bringing you issues that they don't really want to deal with, and they hope they can just kind of push over to you because you're so helpful. These issues will be like monkeys, distractions, jumping all over your desk, making lots of noise and weighing on your mind about other things that you've got to do, and you're feeling more and more panicky. So instead of accepting their monkey, learn to teach them to think for themselves. Ask them, what do they think they need to do? And if they don't know, send them away to have a think, and talk to them again when they've got some ideas and it's convenient for you to spend time with them, helping them to think through their options. So it's much easier, or better, I should say, to do this than always provide the answers. Although sometimes providing the answers seems like the quick solution, but it just means that those monkeys keep coming at you. So it's actually worth investing the time to say no, getting people to think for themselves, because in the end, they'll learn to do that automatically, and it's better for you, and they become more confident and more effective in turn. So whether you're a manager where this is happening to you, or you're a helpful colleague, it's really important you learn to help people think for themselves and only accept the monkeys that really do need your attention, okay? We can be too kind sometimes. And then last but not least is our confidence levels. Everything I've talked about really does rely on us having a healthy sense of confidence in who we are and our abilities. And at times like this, that can be quite difficult. Even the most confident of us can take knockbacks and find it difficult to recover. So think about tending your confidence as you would a garden or one of your muscles that you would build up at the gym. It needs regular attention. Stop and think, again, referring to that reflection time weekly. Take the time to think of what you've achieved in the week that you've had. What successes have you had? What are you proud of? Even make a note of it so that you can remember when the times are tough, looking back through that notebook to realize, actually, I do a good job. I am okay as a person. I may not be perfect, nobody is, but actually I've done a lot. You need to remind yourself of all the good stuff you've done, particularly when you're under a lot of pressure. And it will also help you at appraisal time, or if you're going for a new role, updating your CV with your achievements. So taking that time to build your confidence by reminding yourself of how well you're doing and the journey you've made is really important and vital. So hopefully I've convinced you that healthy selfishness is something worth having. It's a necessity, not a luxury. It helps us work effectively, to be productive, to think clearly, to deliver on key goals, to remain healthy, balanced, and confident. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, I think. Yes, just to mention, we're going to be launching our mentoring scheme in January. Sign up to our LinkedIn page if you haven't already. We'll be posting hints and tips and blogs on mentoring to share with you to start to encourage and excite enthusiasm from both potential mentees and mentors. Thank you very much. And now if anybody would like to ask questions, John and I are happy to take them.
Yep, thanks Amanda, and thank you to John as well. Some useful tips in there, and I now know what those things jumping around in my head are called, and they're called monkeys, along with my children, who I do also call monkeys, and lots of other names which are probably not publishable. Anyway, I think we also, I know Danielle, I can see Danielle is still here. I don't know whether we've got Maria, and yeah, Maria is here and possibly Ian. I haven't seen any questions pop in, but I don't know whether anyone's got just any general comments or thoughts that they want to share. If anyone wants to sort of pop their video on and share their sound, then they're very welcome to. There's certainly a few good tips in there from Amanda. I'm certainly going to use the tip of sending monkeys away. I'm not sure how effective it will be, but we'll give it a go.
I'll pick up on Danielle's question, if that's all right, Julie. So tips for saying no without guilt to things from people who are equally overwhelmed and burnt out. No easy answer to this. I think what I would do, you could share this session with them, Danielle. The thing is, ultimately, we can only really take care of ourselves and encourage other people to do the same. We can't always take on their burdens as well, much though we may want to. And I think that's particularly true when we're managing people and feel a sense of responsibility for our team. So I think share some of those tips and techniques. Are some of those team members or peers maybe not doing some of the things they could do to help themselves be more effective? So maybe I think a little bit of co-mentoring, co-coaching would be quite useful there. Perhaps even an action learning group, actually. Sometimes when you review it as a group, you realize, particularly in times like this, you're working on things that really aren't so important anymore, so they can take a back seat. Reprioritizing, making sure you are focusing on the right things can all be helpful. And as a team, perhaps acknowledging there are certain things we're just going to let go on the back burner for now, because that's just the way life is. And helping other teams that you work up against, if that's going to affect them, why it's happening. I think those are my quickest, best tips for you.
Yeah, Karen's just said about not putting in meetings back to back, and you know it is very easy in the virtual world in which we live to think, okay, well I can have that meeting for half an hour and go straight into that meeting for half an hour and straight into that meeting. The flip side of that I've found is that if you leave half an hour in as a gap, for example, you tend to find the meetings push out, and then you get perhaps less useful time in between, which is perhaps another issue. But you know, these are all the problems that we're going to find as we move into this kind of, well, we've been with it now for over 6 months in terms of this virtual world that we've all become quite familiar with, and I think we will see effects of this new way of working coming out the other side, and we'll have to learn to deal with that in the same way as we've learned to deal with lots of other things. And I mean, certainly for me, I've found I miss the commute. I miss the drive to work, where I'd kind of switch into work mode, and I miss the drive back, where I tend to switch, you know, as switched off as I can ever be.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I quite agree. I've always loved commuting. People have said to me, oh, you know, that train journey, but I loved it for just that reason. And so one of the other things, actually, I've not included, but I've been suggesting to people is before you start work at home, go for that walk for half an hour. So it's like you've commuted somewhere. Allow yourself that time to breathe and relax before then you come in and you come to your desk, wherever that's set up, and doing the same sort of thing at lunchtime and at the end of the day. Give yourself that physically walk away from the house as if you are leaving behind work and try and come back with a different mindset. Things like that are useful. With meetings, make sure the meetings you're invited to have got agendas and that people stick to time. And if they can't do that for you, don't go. You know, it's, well, where is it? People otherwise, they get lazy, and their laziness is selfish in an unhealthy way, and you don't want to go there. I also want to mention, actually, John made a good point. Oh, sorry, John was waving. John?
No, you go first.
Oh, I was just going to say, you made a really good point when we were chatting the other day about standing up maybe for meetings. Don't sit down continuously, because again, it can give you health issues. Yeah. So make sure to do that, as well as taking that time out to exercise. Back to you, John.
One of the things that occurred to me was how many variations there are on things like working at home. So just to go to one extreme, some people will welcome the fact that they don't have to commute to work every day, if you see what I mean. The change is very small and very simple. Someone that I know well, he works for a firm of accountants, and they do audits. And the result of all the changes has been that they have to do the audit online. They can no longer visit the client and meet people. And even more importantly, he is supervising a different team of people, some of whom he's never met, for that audit. Now, that seems to me extraordinarily challenging. Most of us who have gone through the process of management know that it's much harder to manage remote staff than people that you're with most days, or at least for part of the time. And what you're missing out on are all the signals. I would personally welcome a situation if I was to meet people when they were new in the job and get to know them. And then I wouldn't mind if they worked remotely, because then you would pick up some of the things when things weren't right for them. But to try and pick things up for people you don't know is really hard. And if you're cutting down on all the interaction, it's even worse. A particular example is that we're all seated. I've got a friend who's a GP, and her priority in life before she was retiring was to make sure that no one came into her surgery and then dropped dead. So for the moment they came through the door, and how they walked and how they sat down and the colour of their skin, she was taking all those things on board, trying to make sure that they were okay and that they were fit to leave. And you've probably all heard of the doorknob conversation. The people who go through all that, and the important thing is when they reach the doorknob and suddenly they're saying why they're really there. And remote working, you miss out on all those things. Those are the dangers. And it's particularly bad, of course, if the only contact you have with people is the online contact when they're sitting down. You get a very artificial view of them.
Mm. I'd like to pick up on a question from Marina around the increased focus on mental well-being, mental health and well-being rather, and whether it's now easier for us to start to challenge unhealthy work practices. And I think it is helping. And there's more and more data out there to prove the cost to business, because businesses usually like some hard facts, don't they? And monetary ones as well. So yes, I think it is helping. It's always going to be a little bit difficult. There'll always be an element of, is poor mental health the new bad back syndrome for people who are trying to avoid things? But I think they will be the minority. I think the majority of the time, people that are suffering with mental health issues or with their well-being are going to be genuine, and we should be taking notice of them. And some of that's around educating managers particularly, because the more senior people are, the more resilient they tend to be, which is why their careers have reached the point they have. Other people maybe just want nice jobs that they do, that are comfortable, that earn them money, and then they go home. And it can be very difficult for senior managers to understand the psyche, if you like, of people that are more at the more junior end of the spectrum in their organisation. And really, that's an awareness thing. So yeah,
I want to get the money for.
Okay.
I've just muted them, sorry.
That's all right, no worries. Yeah, yes, and presenteeism, yes, as Leela's put there, yeah. I think there's probably a lot of that, and even more with COVID, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so talk about 18 to 30-year-olds suffering more. It's a really fascinating one, isn't it? I've been looking a lot at mental toughness, actually, and I might look to run a webinar on this soon. Mental toughness and mental sensitivity. Mental toughness being how, not just how resilient we are to coping with difficulties, but taking it beyond mere resilience to being proactive and actually being able to take on board and control and direct the path of our lives more effectively. So that's mental toughness. It's a very robust model developed by Professor Peter Clough, and I'd be very happy to do a session on that if people would find that useful going forward.
Well, I have to say thank you to Anna, because she's highly recommended me. I'm not quite sure what for, but possibly mince pie tasting. Right, well, thank you to everybody who has spoken today. So to Ian and Maria for our sessions earlier on, Danielle for taking the reins and keeping them in time check as well, and for the very kind offer of Essex University premises if we were able to attend in person, but perhaps we can take you up on that at a future. In the future. I'm sure we will return to face-to-face events at some point, but quite when, who knows. And also thank you to Amanda and John, both some very useful and very interesting insights. And I can see a good few people are going to take up some of Amanda's points there, including myself. And I think a lot of us need to learn to say no, which is a very short word, a very easy word to say, but actually is one of the hardest ones, I think, to say, particularly for a lot of people in the current times. What I was just talking about on the topic of well-being before we allowed everyone to join, and it's something that I've been talking about a couple of times this week and indeed last, is in terms of well-being and us as HR professionals. I think we have to be kind to ourselves, and we have to understand that we have taken quite a beating. I think it's probably fair to say we've taken a lot on our shoulders since March, and perhaps a little bit before, with a whole heap of things, lots of change. We have become perhaps a more readily integral cog of business wheels, where perhaps we've not really been recognised for such a thing in the past. And we are carrying a lot of our own weight, those of our families, those of our colleagues, and also those of the business. And I think it is a very important point that Amanda is saying, in terms of just taking the time to say, I'm going to turn my computer off. I'm going to make some time for myself. And I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to say, certainly for this second lockdown, I have taken the decision that I am going to go for a run every second day. And I am about a week and a bit into it. I didn't start right at the beginning, but I have not missed a run yet, despite the fact that it was raining on one day. And I will be honest, and I will say I feel a heck of a lot better for it. I really, really do. And it means that I'm, waking up more in the morning a little bit fresher than perhaps I would otherwise have done. So I'm not suggesting you all go and take up running by any stretch of the imagination. It wrecks your knees, it wrecks your ankles. But find that one thing that you enjoy, that gives you that break, that gives you the time away from the computer, gives you a little bit of you time, and I'm sure you've all got those suggestions. So please do take that up and use the tricks and tips and have a think about what everyone else has said. Is there anything from you, Danielle, that you'd like to say?
Just to say a huge thank you very much to you, Julie, to Amanda, and to John, especially, who I've worked with over the last year in helping to put the event together, and John for coming up with the original idea, and everybody else for being involved as well. I think it's a great opportunity for us, for the university, to collaborate directly with the CIPD, and we really appreciate it as well. And just say thank you again to Ian and Maria, and John and Amanda for their talks today as well. So it's been a fascinating afternoon, and I've really enjoyed it as well. So just a huge thank you very much from me.
Well, thank you. Ian, is there just a few words from you? Is there anything you want to finish on? Trying to find the unmute button.
Yeah. No, caught me by surprise on that one. No, I mean, I would just say this is the first time I've attended one of the Essex and Ipswich CIPD branch meetings, because I'm actually sort of commuting. Well, I used to be commuting from London to come in, but I will definitely be attending more of these. So I've enjoyed it a lot. I know this is a kind of annual event, but it seems a very engaging community. So I sort of hope to attend again.
Yeah, we've just reminded me, I need to just do a quick plug of the future events, but I'll quickly just see if Maria wants to add anything, and then I'll go to John and Amanda.
Really just I've really enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of my work. As I mentioned, I presented some of my work to a branch meeting a couple of years ago, and it's been really nice to be able to share how some of that research activity has developed over time. So thank you very much for that. And I'd kind of just reiterate the message around everyone, be kind to yourselves in these challenging times. Thank you.
Thank you. John, and big thank you to you for all of your efforts over the years and for your brainchild of this event.
Right. Well, I'm grateful to everyone for their support over 7 years in the chair. The time had come to me for me to stand down. I find myself increasingly intolerant of other people's deadlines, but if I can help anyone, I'd be still glad to do so.
Thanks, John. And Amanda?
No, thank you very much. It's been an enjoyable afternoon. I've really enjoyed all the speeches, and thank you. And I'm glad that people have found it useful. Do get in touch with me on LinkedIn if you would like to, and ask any other questions, after this event that occur to you. Feel free.
Yeah. We do have a LinkedIn group. We do have a Facebook group or page. Not quite sure what the right terminology is, but do feel free to get involved. Running to time because I've not been involved. It is nearly 5:30. So again, thank you to everyone. Please do take some time out for yourselves, and please do everybody take care, and hopefully we will see you at a future event, be it online or in person at some point. All right, so take care everyone, and thank you to everyone for all of your contributions, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.